Folks, they're the authoritarians. They're not fighting for democracy. They wouldn't know democracy if they hit them in the face.
Eliminate the Electoral College. Now that's authoritarian. A majority vote, that's the most authoritarian thing I've ever heard of in my life. You know, I've always wondered what I would do if I had a Fox News show and I sold my soul out to a Republican candidate to help them get elected president of the United States. Then a year after they get elected, millions of people storm the streets calling them a king. My approval rating goes to the garbage bin. All of my policies have a garbage approval rating. The only major legislation I've ever passed is a garbage approval rating. What would I do? I don't know, but here's what Mark Levin did. This is pretty funny.
I'm so sick of this. These are people who are ignoramuses. They don't know American history. And the funny thing is, the shoe is really on the other foot. The Democrat Party is about sabotage, subterfuge, usurpation. That's what they're about. This is a Democrat Party, as a matter of fact, that wanted to pack the Supreme Court. They've packed the lower courts. Oh, that's very democratic. This is a Democrat Party that wants to eliminate the Electoral College. So all but the most populous states with the biggest cities, they're the only ones that have a say in our government. The incredible lawfare against the President of the United States when he was a private citizen, president, candidate, president again. We've been into that. The 1619 Project, which is a complete repudiation of our founding. All Democrat, DEI, CRT, a complete repudiation of our country. Groups like CARE. This group, CARE, is tied to Hamas, and there are other groups like that. They find a home in the Democrat Party. They work with the Democrat Party. They're supported by the Democrat Party. Economic socialism, that's the new banner of the Democrat Party and their friends in the Democratic Socialist Movement, aka Marxist Islamist movement. What else? They keep changing our election laws to ensure that they win. What do you think of that? They want to add Puerto Rico as a state and the District of Columbia as a state so they can pack the Senate with 4 more Democrats. Very democratic, you know. Lawless sanctuary cities, which go back to really a notion in the Confederacy, that is, nullification of our federal immigration laws. So the open borders are open in violation of federal law. Now they don't want to deport people in violation of federal law. Why? Because they want to use illegal aliens to create more Democrat congressional seats. Very democratic. They have monopoly control over our universities and faculty. They have monopoly control over our teachers' unions, K through 9. They have a massive bureaucracy that really belongs to them. Let's be honest about that. They don't much like the Constitution's separation of power. They're always pushing for the centralization of power. They don't like the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, the Second, the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Eighth, Ninth, Tenth. They're not very happy with the 14th Amendment either. Folks, they're the authoritarians. They're not fighting for democracy. They wouldn't know democracy if they hit them in the face.
So that's Mark Levin's answer to the No Kings protest. Not to dive into the details of accountability office rulings or the 1/3 of court cases that have been ignored or the myriad of asylum laws that have been ignored. No, it's not to do any of that. It's to crap out a bunch of random bullet points that have nothing to do with authoritarianism. Let's go through these one by one, actually. Let me pull this up right here. All right, he starts off with his only plausible point, which is Supreme Court and federal court packing. In general, both parties have been opposed to this, but, you know, the last time the federal courts have been packed, per se, was under Jimmy Carter, and he got all those appointments. He was a Democrat, but that was bipartisan legislation. He didn't just do it off the executive branch, he did it through Congress, so he's not an authoritarian for doing that, and they did it not so he could have more judicial power, but because the courts were being very much overwhelmed. He didn't really have any option there. That was one of the big things that Jimmy Carter did, right? Eliminate the Electoral College. Now that's authoritarian. A majority vote, that's the most authoritarian thing I've ever heard of in my life. Lawfare versus the President of the United States. I've tired that out so much. I don't want to talk about it anymore. 1619 Project. What does that have to do with authoritarianism? Like, there's a historicity problem there. You could say, I would debate to what extent America's success was built on the backs of slavery. I would lean towards the argument that slavery was actually inhibitory economically, because you had a whole subset of people who couldn't express their full economic value and were subjugated to a second class. So I mean that's a fun debate, but I'm not sure what that has to do with anything right there. DEI and CRT. Again, CRT, you can make CRT is just the idea that race matters in society and that you can't feasibly create a colorblind dynamic. You have to recognize color. It has some issues with the people who promote it, but nothing wrong with the theory itself. DEI depends on what DEI policy you have. Again, none of this has to do with authoritarianism. The whole Fox News agenda is making Republicans have a false idea of what Democrats actually are. Like, in their mind, DEI is like a monolith. Not that this has anything to do with the executive branch, by the way. Really, I mean, at all. And Trump's dismantling of DEI, against, in some cases, like rulings of Reagan judges, even in the NIH grant freezes. Or that was our RFK's freezes there, or cuts. That's more authoritarian than anything. CIRR, that's the Muslim Civil Rights Advocacy Organization. Again, Islamophobia here. I guess Muslims are just inherently authoritarian. They do have an awful lot of authoritarian states in the Middle East. I'll give them that. I'll be the first to point that out. Economic socialism, to my knowledge, there isn't a single socialist in the Democratic Party. Even Zohran Mamdani. He's not a socialist in my eyes. Like, his most socialist policy is rent freeze, and that's not even a socialist policy. It's not even close to a socialist policy. Socialism is a very specific thing. Cultural Marxism, that's a stupid phrase that is entirely meaningless. Changing election laws. So changing election laws, there was a few Supreme Court rulings in Wisconsin about essentially ballot drop boxes. If conservatives would like to steal future elections by accommodating for a pandemic, by allowing people to do these drop boxes, then go ahead. I'll be all arms for that. But the important thing is that the Supreme Court in Wisconsin overturned the initial pro-Trump ruling in 2022. And he did have his one successful court case, I think, was in Wisconsin. And it was about the same thing. He failed his other 60 court cases. And the one that he did win, it wasn't even a full, endorsement of his argument by the court. It was very much mixed and just for guidance, really. And it wasn't about fraud either. Add Puerto Rico and DC as states to pack the Senate. This is pro-democracy. This is the ultimate. This is like getting rid of the Electoral College. And if you're pro-democracy, then by definition you are pro doing that. There is no arguing. I just don't know how anyone can possibly argue the contrary there. How can you say that giving these people more representation is undemocratic? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Nullifying immigration laws. That's an interesting one. The only immigration laws that have been nullified are, people's right to a credible fear interview, withholding from removal, asylum. All of those are immigration laws. They're codified, in statutes, and they have been ripped apart. Litigation will bring them back in due time. There's a class action lawsuit about all of those. But is this about sanctuary cities? Nullifying immigration? Even though it is not only do they have the right to be a sanctuary city, I would argue that our Constitution is set up in a way that favors the existence of sanctuary cities. We saw this with Arizona in the early 2010s. They essentially tried to do federal immigration enforcement with local police, essentially materials, funding, etc. It was ruled illegal. So leaving federal civil immigration enforcement to the feds is actually preferred here because the state really has nothing to do with these policies. Democrats are apparently against the 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th, 9th, and 10th Amendment. What's with the 8th Amendment? Isn't the 8th Amendment cruel and unusual punishment? Where does that come from? Aren't they anti-death penalty? I guess. Wait, this is where it comes from. This is a big brain connection right here. The Trump civil fine for his overstatement of Mar-a-Lago by 30 times and his overstatement of Trump Tower by 3 times and the overstatement of Trump Tower's square footage by 3 times. He was fined many millions for that, and that fine was overturned. But for the brief moment that it was not overturned, I guess that was cruel and unusual punishment. and it was from a judge. It wasn't from the executive branch, so it's completely useless right there. Not even from the feds. This had nothing to do with the federal government. So that's always nice. First Amendment. Don't you think taking away people's visas who write completely peaceful peaceful essays against Israel is like anti First Amendment? Don't you think banning the Associated Press from going to any of your Oval Office talks or questioning you in front of Air Force One, isn't that kind of anti free speech there? Isn't your FCC can't every conservative admit, even Ted Cruz and like Ben Shapiro, that what the FCC did to Jimmy Kimmel with the endorsement of Donald Trump is egregious? Is egregious FCC First Amendment behavior. Cutting off NEH grants, humanities grants to legitimate winners of those grants due to their viewpoints. That's viewpoint discrimination. And it's anti First Amendment. Second Amendment, we're free to dislike the amendments. There's nothing wrong with disliking amendments. I don't know why his argument's going here, but I fully dislike the Second Amendment. It's not applicable to modern society. It's completely meaningless. It's about states mobilizing individuals who do have the right to bear arms, but states mobilizing fundamentally against other states in the federal government. Which is just silly. It's completely silly that it's essentially become an amendment for men to have toys. It's nothing more than that. I actually found out Coleman Hughes. I used to think he was just like another conservative, but he's actually anti-Second Amendment. Just fun fact there. If you want a good conservative to listen to Coleman Hughes. He's pretty good. Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment. Fourth Amendment, you had Tom Homan going on Fox News saying ICE was arresting people based on their skin color. That's an obvious Fourth Amendment issue. Most ICE workplace raids are Fourth Amendment issues, to be honest, because unless you have a specific person in mind that you're going to be detaining, you're going to be operating off of a very thin veil of reasonable suspicion. So the Fourth Amendment is all around there, and ICE detainers in and of themselves, which a lot of states still use, have been found in multiple courts every time it's ruled against. That it's a Fourth Amendment violation because you're basically unlawfully imprisoning someone to extend their sentence until ICE can come pick them up. I don't have the biggest problem with that if they're super violent or whatever, but if they're just stealing a toothbrush, I think it's kind of silly. Sixth Amendment, that's about representation. Didn't Donald Trump remove clearances of people who litigated against him in violation of the Sixth Amendment? That was in violation of the First, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment. The 14th Amendment, who's against the Constitution here when you're complaining about illegals being counted in the census? The census is very clear that people who preside on this land have some kind of stakeholdership in the government. No matter if, even felons who don't vote. Right, this is not about voting. Have a stakeholdership here. Murderers have a stakeholdership. They should be counted because the state has to take care of them. They are under the jurisdiction of the state, so therefore they should be counted. Having a census to do anything other than that is just silly. Same with birthright citizenship. It's the clearest thing, clear as day. You are opposed to it. You, Mark Levin, are opposed to this. That is authoritarianism rewriting known interpretations of the Constitution to the executive's will, right? And at the order of the executive, the whole Texas drama was at the order of Donald Trump. That has never been done before. A mid-decade census count at the order of the president. What kind of beyond all the ICE stuff, sending ICE into cities, whatever. Most of it's probably legal. ICE has a broad authority to do that, unfortunately. This is the stuff that actually matters, right? The DOJ, the fund impoundment. All the stuff I'm going over right now, this is what really matters. Am I going to go over every amendment here? What did I miss one? I think I got all of them. Fifth Amendment, due process. Everything's a due process violation, essentially. The law firms being taken away their stuff that you can say, oh, that's a due process because you did not go through a proper administrative process to come to that decision. It was arbitrary and capricious. Therefore, it's a due process violation. Every single immigration thing, the 76 Guatemalan children that were shoved onto a plane in the middle of the night. That's due process. Everything's due process. Mark Levin is just a funny guy.